The egg cracked with a sound that echoed through the hatching chamber like breaking glass. Sylvan leaned forward from her stone perch, watching with ancient eyes that had seen this moment 10,000 times before. But now, each hatching felt like witnessing a miracle that might be the last. The tiny snout pushed through the shell. Silver scales caught the light from the thermal pools. For a moment, hope flickered in Sylvan's chest. Then she saw the tremor in the hatchling's wings, the slight wrongness in how its legs folded. Her heart sank like a stone dropped into deep water. 3 eggs this decade. Only 3. And already she could see the sickness in this one. Shara, the mother, curve her massive body around the struggling infant. Her copper scales had dulled over the years of grief. This was her 7th clutch. The first 6 had produced nothing but empty shells and stillborn dreams. He lives, Shara whispered, her voice rough with emotions the Scarith were taught to suppress. Sylvan, he lives. Yes, Sylvan said softly. He lives. For now, she thought but did not say. For a few years perhaps, if luck favored them. The genetic defect that was killing their species showed no mercy. It took the strong and weak alike, slowly, painfully, inevitably. Sylvan rose from her perch and spread her wings. At 400 years old, she was among the eldest of their kind. She remembered when the skies of Ashenfell had been thick with dragons, when their cities had sprawled across 6 continents, when their children had numbered in the millions. Now, the skies were empty. The cities crumbled, and the children could be counted on her claws. She glided down from the hatching chamber, her shadow passing over abandoned nesting grounds. Once, every platform would have held an egg. Now, dust gathered on stone that had grown cold. The thermal vents still pumped heat into the massive cavern, but there were no eggs to warm. The council chamber sat at the heart of their last remaining city. Carved from volcanic rock over 3,000 years ago, it had hosted the debates of billions. Now, 11 dragons gathered in a space meant for thousands. Their scales bore the colors of their ancient houses: bronze, silver, gold, cobalt, emerald, all fading, all dying. Wraith was already speaking when Sylvan entered. The youngest council member at barely 100 years old, he had never known their species at its height. He had been born into the decline, raised in the shadow of extinction. "We have tried everything," Wraith said, his blue scales catching the light from the lava flows beneath the chamber. "Our own geneticists have failed. The Corin scientists worked for 30 years and found nothing. The Half Collective sent their finest minds. All failures. Then we accept our fate with dignity," rumbled Corvin, his golden scales scarred from 100 battles fought in the old wars. "We are Scarith. We do not beg. Dignity will not warm empty nests," Wraith shot back. "Pride will not bring back our children." "Watch your tongue," hatchling, Corvin growled. "Enough." Sylvan's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Both dragons fell silent. "Wraith, speak plainly. What do you propose?" Wraith's claws scraped against stone. Even he, young and desperate as he was, hesitated at what he was about to suggest. "The humans," he finally said. "We asked the humans for help." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Corvin laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "The humans? Those soft-skinned children who only discovered fire fusion 300 years ago? You would have us crawl to them. They are crude," another council member added. "Short-lived, barely worthy of trade agreements, let alone this." "They are alive," Wraith said quietly. "Their population grows while ours shrinks. They solve problems we consider impossible. They have saved 17 species from genetic collapse in the last century alone. By throwing bodies at the problem," Corvin scoffed. "By breeding like insects and overwhelming challenges with numbers. We are Scarith. We do not operate like them." Sylvan closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw the empire they had been. 40 billion strong, spread across 200 worlds, masters of physics and art and philosophy. They had built wonders that made other species weep. They had considered themselves the peak of evolution, the inheritors of the galaxy's future. And now, 3 eggs in a decade. 3 sick children to carry the weight of all that history. She opened her eyes and looked at each council member in turn. She saw the same thing in all of them. Pride wrapped around fear like armor around a dying heart. I was there, she said softly, when we first made contact with the Corrin. They were stronger than us then, more advanced. It took everything I had to ask them for a trade alliance. I thought it would break me, that admission that we needed anyone. She spread her wings, the membrane still strong despite her age. But I did it because our people needed resources we did not have. I swallowed my pride and did what survival required. This is different, Corvin protested. The Corrin were our equals, or near enough. The humans are nothing. The humans are living, Sylvan said. We are dying. That makes them something we are not. She turned to face the council fully. I have lived 400 years. I have seen our species at its greatest height and watched it fall to this. I will not let pride be the last thing we cling to as we fade into history. She looked toward the hatching chambers, where Shara watched over her trembling son. We choose. Today, pride or survival. We cannot have both. The vote took an hour. It passed by a single claw. Sylvan composed the message herself, each word carefully chosen to maintain what dignity they had left while making their desperation clear. When it was sent toward human space, she walked to the eastern tower and looked out over their world in the distance. Another star flickered and went dark. The colony of Rethian Prime, she knew, abandoned last month when their population fell below sustainable levels. Another world returning to silence. She counted the stars that remained lit. Fewer each year, fewer each month. The humans would probably refuse, or they would help and fail like all the others. But at least when the last Scarith egg failed to hatch and their species breathed its final breath, she would know they had tried everything, even the unthinkable, even asking the humans for help. Oliver Hayes had never expected to receive a message that would change everything. He sat in his small lab aboard Research Station Galileo 7, staring at the screen with hands that had forgotten how to move. The Scarith were asking for help. The Scarith, the species that had refused assistance from anyone for their entire recorded history. The dragons who looked at other species the way mountains looked at pebbles. You're going to answer them, right? Dr. Sarah Kim stood in the doorway, her eyes wide. Oliver, this is unprecedented. They've never asked anyone for anything. Oliver read the message again. Beneath the formal language and careful phrasing, he could feel the desperation like heat from a dying fire. A species watching itself fade. Parents burying children. A future shrinking with every passing year. He knew that feeling. Knew it in his bones. I'm going, he said quietly. The team will need at least 3 months to prepare. We'll need to assemble specialists from across the Federation, coordinate with xenobiology departments, establish protocols for working with a species we barely understand. I'm going alone, Oliver interrupted. And I'm leaving tomorrow. Sarah stared at him like he had suggested swimming through a star. Alone? Oliver, this is the most important case you'll ever work on. You need support. You need backup. They're already humiliated, Oliver said, finally looking up from the screen. They've spent 300 years watching their children die, and now they've had to beg for help from a species they consider inferior. The last thing they need is an army of humans showing up to remind them how far they've fallen. He stood and began pulling files from his personal archive. Genetic sequences, treatment protocols, case studies from the 17 species humanity had helped pull back from the edge of extinction. One person, quiet, respectful. That's what they need. Sarah watched him work in silence for a moment. Then she said very softly, "This is about Lily, isn't it?" Oliver's hands stopped moving. He stood with his back to Sarah, staring at the wall where a small picture hung. A girl with dark hair and her father's eyes, frozen forever at 7 years old. It's about doing the job right, he said. His voice sounded distant even to himself. Oliver, I'll send reports every week. If I need help, I'll ask. He resumed packing, movements sharp and precise. But I'm going alone. The trip to Ashenfell took 6 days through jump gates. Oliver spent the time reviewing everything known about Scarith biology, which wasn't much. They were private to the point of secrecy, shared little about themselves, and seemed to consider curiosity from other species to be an insult. Working with them would be like performing surgery on someone who considered showing pain to be a moral failure. His shuttle descended through Ashenfell's atmosphere, and Oliver got his first real look at a dragon world. Massive volcanic ranges stretched across continents. Cities carved from stone clung to mountain faces, their architecture grand and empty. He saw landing platforms built for thousands of ships, hosting only a handful. Skies that should have been thick with dragons, empty as old graves. The landing platform they directed him to could have held 50 vessels. His small shuttle looked like a toy forgotten in an enormous room. 3 dragons waited for him. Oliver had seen images, of course, but nothing prepared him for the reality. They were beautiful and terrible, each one the size of a small building. Their scales caught the light like polished metal. Their eyes held intelligence that had calculated stellar orbits before humans had invented the wheel. The largest, her scales the color of tarnished silver, stepped forward. "I'm Elder Matriarch Sylvan. You are Dr. Hayes." Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in a voice that expected no disagreement. "I am," Oliver said, climbing down from his shuttle with his equipment cases. "Thank you for allowing me to help." Something flickered across Sylvan's massive face. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. "You came yourself. We expected you to request data transfers, tissue samples to be sent to your facilities. You can't solve something like this from a distance," Oliver said simply. "I need to see the children, understand how the defect presents, track the progression in living subjects." He paused, then added more gently, "And data can't tell me what you need. Only you can do that." The dragons exchanged glances that Oliver couldn't interpret. Sylvan gestured with one massive claw toward a doorway carved into the mountain. "Kulme, we have prepared a facility for your work." The facility was a large chamber with thermal pools and stone tables. Someone had attempted to adapt it for human use, adding equipment interfaces and environmental controls. It felt like a throne room converted into a laboratory, grand and slightly wrong. Sylvan and the others spent 3 hours briefing Oliver with cold precision. They presented genetic data, progression charts, mortality rates. They spoke of their children like case files, their voices carefully empty of emotion. Oliver listened, made notes, asked technical questions. Then, when they seemed finished, he asked, "May I meet the children?" The dragons went silent. Sylvan's head tilted slightly. "The data should be sufficient for initial analysis. The hatchlings are fragile. We prefer to minimize their exposure to unnecessary contact." "I understand," Oliver said, "but I need to see them, not as data points, as patients. Our information includes detailed scans, genetic profiles, comprehensive medical histories." Wraith, the blue dragon, trailed off as Oliver shook his head. "I'm sure it does, but I don't treat genetic sequences. I treat living beings who happen to have genetics." Oliver met Sylvan's ancient eyes. "Please, let me meet the children." Another long silence. Then Sylvan turned and began walking deeper into the mountain. "Follow." The hatching sanctuary was warm, lit by thermal pools that glowed like captured sunlight. Stone platforms held 3 small dragons, each one tended by an adult. They were tiny compared to their parents, no larger than horses, their scales still soft with youth. Oliver approached the nearest platform, where Shara curved her body protectively around the hatchling from the first scene. The small dragon's breathing was labored, his wings trembling with each breath. "May I?" Oliver asked Shara softly. The mother dragon's eyes were full of pain and suspicion and desperate hope all tangled together. Slowly, she lifted her wing. Oliver climbed onto the platform and knelt beside the hatchling. He pulled out a scanner, but before using it, he placed one hand gently on the small dragon's head. The scales were warm, softer than he expected. "Hey there," he said quietly. "I'm Oliver. I'm here to help you feel better." The hatchling's eyes opened. They were gold, bright despite his sickness. He made a small sound, almost curious. Behind him, Oliver heard Shara's sharp intake of breath, heard the shuffle of other dragons moving closer. He ignored them, focused entirely on the small life struggling beneath his hand. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Oliver murmured, beginning his examination with gentle movements. That's good. We're going to need that fight. Both of us. As he worked, talking softly to the hatchling throughout, Oliver was aware of the dragons watching him with something like confusion. Let them watch, he thought. Let them see that their children were more than data, more than problems to be solved. They were lives worth fighting for. And he would fight for every single one. 3 months had passed since Oliver arrived on Ashenfell. His small quarters near the laboratory had become home in the way that places do when you stop noticing the walls and start noticing the work. The work consumed him. 18 hours a day, sometimes more, bent over genetic sequences and treatment protocols. The Scarith defect was elegant in its cruelty. A cascade failure that began in the egg and spread slowly through the growing hatchling, disrupting cellular repair and immune function. Like watching a building collapse in slow motion, one support beam at a time, that he had made progress. Small victories measured in extended lifespans and reduced symptoms. The hatchling he had first met, the one Shara called Kai, had shown improvement. His breathing had steadied. The tremors in his wings had decreased, but improvement was not cure. And Oliver knew better than anyone that sometimes improvement was just a brief stop on the way down. The Scarith kept their distance. They provided everything he requested, answered every question with clinical precision, but they never got close. They watched him work like scientists observing an experiment, noting his methods, but never engaging with the human behind them. Oliver understood. They had been burned too many times, hoped too often, buried too many children. Distance was armor, and they had learned to wear it well. He was analyzing protein sequences when Shara's roar shattered the morning quiet. Oliver ran. His human legs were no match for the distances in this place built for dragons, but he ran anyway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew that sound. Every parent who had ever watched their child suffer knew that sound. Kai lay on his platform, his small body convulsing. His temperature had spiked. His cellular readings were catastrophic. The slow decline had suddenly become a cliff edge. What happened? Oliver gasped, already pulling out his scanner, his hands steady despite the fear flooding his system. He was fine an hour ago, Shara said, her voice cracking around the edges. He was eating, he was talking, then he just collapsed. Oliver's mind raced through possibilities. Rejection cascade. The treatment was failing. Kai's system was shutting down, and they had maybe hours before the damage became irreversible. I need to move my equipment here, Oliver said. All of it. Right now. Wraith, who had come running with the others, stared at him. Your laboratory has everything you need. You can work there, and I'm not leaving him. Oliver was already on his communicator, sending commands to his automated systems. If he's going into rejection, I need to monitor him constantly. Every minute matters. You cannot maintain that pace, Sylvan said, appearing at the entrance to the sanctuary. Humans require sleep, regular rest. You will be useless if you collapse. Oliver looked up at her, and something in his expression made the ancient dragon take a step back. I didn't come here to be useful, he said quietly. I came here to save lives. I don't sleep while my patients are dying. The equipment arrived within the hour, carried by dragons who seemed uncertain about this strange human rearranging their sacred space. Oliver worked while he set up, his hands never stopping, monitoring Kai's vitals on portable displays while directing the placement of analysis equipment and treatment modules. Then he settled in beside Kai's platform and began to fight that 96 hours. For days that blurred into one continuous moment of crisis and response. Oliver's world narrowed to genetic sequences scrolling across screens, to the rhythm of Kai's labored breathing, to the desperate search for the variable he was missing. The dragons rotated guards, watching this human push himself past all reasonable limits. They brought him food that he ate without tasting. They tried to convince him to rest. He ignored them, his attention locked on the small dragon fighting for life beside him on hour 42. Wraith found Oliver talking to Kai. The hatchling was unconscious, had been for a day, but Oliver kept up a steady stream of soft words. I know you're fighting, little one, Oliver murmured, adjusting an infusion rate with one hand while stroking Kai's head with the other. I know it hurts and you're tired, but I won't let you fight alone. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Wraith stood frozen in the doorway. In 3 months, he had never heard Oliver's voice sound like that. Gentle, almost broken, like the words were as much for the speaker as the listener. "You speak to him as if he can hear you," Wraith said quietly. Oliver didn't look up. "Maybe he can, maybe he can't, but I'd rather he hear a voice than silence. Wouldn't you?" Wraith had no answer for that. Hour 67 brought another crisis. Kai's protein synthesis began failing. Oliver dove into the data with eyes that burned from exhaustion, searching for the pattern he knew had to be there. His hand shook as he typed. His vision blurred at the edges, but he found a feedback loop in the cellular repair mechanism, so subtle that every other researcher had missed it, buried in the cascade of other failures. But it was there, and if he could interrupt it, he could stop the rejection. Oliver modified the treatment protocol, his fingers flying across interfaces with a muscle memory of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He prepared the new compound, checked it twice, checked it again. Then he administered it to Kai and waited. Hour 89. Kai's temperature began to drop. His protein synthesis stabilized. The cascade stopped. Oliver watched the readings climb back towards safe levels, and something inside him that had been wound tight for 4 days finally loosened. He put his head down on the edge of Kai's platform. Just for a moment, just to catch his breath, he woke to darkness and warmth. Someone had covered him while he slept. No, not someone. Something. He opened his eyes and found himself sheltered beneath Shara's wing. The copper dragon curved around both him and her son. Kai was breathing steadily. His readings were stable. He was going to live. Oliver carefully extracted himself from beneath Shara's wing. The mother dragon's eye opened, watching him. They looked at each other in the dim light of the sanctuary, and Oliver saw something in her expression that had not been there before. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of it. Neither of them spoke. Shara simply lowered her wing again, this time covering only Kai. Oliver returned to his equipment, his body aching and his mind fuzzy with exhaustion, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. In the council chamber, Sylvan convened an emergency meeting. The 11 dragons gathered in the dark hours before dawn, their faces troubled. "He has not left the sanctuary for 4 days," one council member said. "He pushed himself to physical collapse, saving one hatchling. He speaks to them," another added, "to the unconscious ones. He treats them like children," Sylvan finished softly. "Not specimens, not data, like someone's precious child." "It makes no sense," Corvin rumbled. "He is paid to provide a service. This is a transaction. Why does he act as if each loss would destroy him?" Sylvan thought of Oliver's face when Kai had crashed. The terror there, the determination, the way he had thrown himself into the fight like a soldier defending his own family. "I do not know," she admitted, "but I think we need to understand, because he is showing us something we have forgotten how to see." In the sanctuary, Oliver finally allowed himself to sleep again, his hand resting on Kai's warming scales. The hatchling stirred in his rest, and Oliver's fingers tightened slightly. A gentle reassurance that "I'm here," the gesture said. "You're not alone." And watching from her perch, Shara felt something crack in her chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time. Month 6 arrived with an egg cracking in the early dawn. Oliver had settled into a rhythm by then. His treatment protocols were working. 12 hatchlings had stabilized under his care, their symptoms managed, their futures no longer measured in months, but in years. The Scarith medical teams had learned to work alongside him, their initial coldness thawing into something that almost resembled collaboration. But he had lost 3. 3 small dragons who had slipped away despite everything he knew, everything he tried. Oliver had stood at their memorial fires, watching the smoke carry their ashes toward the stars, and felt the familiar weight of failure crushing his chest. The Scarith found his grief strange. They honored their dead with ceremony and dignity, but they did not weep. They did not stand afterward staring at the flames like they might burn away the guilt. Oliver did both. Now he stood in the hatching sanctuary watching an egg split apart, revealing not one snout but 2. Twins. His heart sank even as it lifted. The first emerged with silver scales that caught the morning light. The second followed, smaller, her scales a deep bronze. Both trembling, both showing the telltale signs of the defect from their very first breaths. Twins are rare for us, Sylvan said quietly beside him. She had taken to observing his work more closely in recent weeks, her ancient eyes missing nothing. We have not seen twin hatchlings survive in 200 years. Oliver was already scanning them, his equipment reading genetic markers and cellular function. The data made his stomach drop. Both critical. Both would need intensive treatment immediately, and he could only treat one at a time. His equipment was not designed for dual protocols. The cellular reconstruction process required dedicated systems, focused attention. Treating both simultaneously would dilute the effectiveness, potentially killing them both. That he looked at the two hatchlings, so small and already fighting so hard, and felt the universe narrow to this impossible choice. I need to prioritize, he said, his voice hollow. The bronze. She's weaker. I'll start with her. The mother, a young dragon named Tessian, made a sound low in her throat. And my son, I'll monitor him, keep him stable. The moment she's secure, I'll switch. Oliver was already preparing the treatment, his hands moving on autopilot while his mind screamed. He's stronger. He has a better chance of lasting until... He did not finish the sentence. Until what? Until his sister was saved or died. Until Oliver could get to him before the defect took hold too deeply. The bronze hatchling, the one Tessian quietly named Sarah, responded to treatment. Slowly, painfully slowly, her readings began to stabilize. Oliver monitored every cell, every protein chain, willing them to rebuild, to hold, to give him just a few more hours. But the silver hatchling, Frost, deteriorated faster than the models predicted. Oliver watched Frost's readings drop on his secondary display, while his hands worked on Sarah. His mind split between two patients, two lives, two impossible equations. Hour 14. Frost's cellular cohesion at 40% and falling. Hour 19. Sarah stabilizing, but not yet secure enough to leave. Hour 23. Frost critical. Oliver made a decision that went against every protocol, every safety measure, every rule he had ever followed. He paused Sarah's treatment. The dragons watching gasped. Wraith stepped forward. What are you doing? You will destabilize her. She will, I know. Oliver was already switching equipment configurations, his exhausted brain calculating dosages for a patient half the size of his previous one. But he's dying right now. She has maybe an hour before the pause causes problems. He has minutes. You cannot save both, Sylvan said. It was not a criticism. It was a statement of fact delivered with the weight of someone who had watched countless impossible choices. Watch me, Oliver growled. He worked on Frost with controlled desperation, stabilizing the worst of the cascade, buying time he did not have. Then, before Frost was truly secure, he switched back to Sarah, catching her before the pause caused irreversible damage, back and forth. Sarah to Frost. Frost to Sarah, pushing equipment past safe limits, pushing himself past human limits. His hands shook, his vision swam, but he did not stop. The dragons wanted to intervene. Corvin actually stepped forward at hour 27, ready to make Oliver choose. But Wraith blocked him. Look at him, Wraith said quietly. Just look. Oliver's face was gray with exhaustion. His hands trembled so badly he had to steady them against the equipment. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements jerky with adrenaline and desperation. He was killing himself trying to save them both. He will die, Corvin said. This human will stop his own heart trying to do the impossible. Yes, Wraith said. He will. That is what we are watching. Hour 31 brought the breaking point. Oliver was switching from Frostback to Sarah when his vision grayed out. He stumbled, caught himself on the platform edge. His heart was hammering irregularly in his chest. He could feel it skipping beats, struggling. Not yet, he thought. Please, not yet. He completed the switch, got Sarah's treatment flowing. His hands fumbled with the controls. So tired. When had he last slept? Days ago, before the twins. Before everything narrowed to this, Frost. Had to check Frost. Oliver turned, took a step toward the other platform. His legs gave out. He felt himself falling, felt the stone rushing up to meet him. Then nothing that he woke in a medical center 3 days later. The first thing he saw was white ceiling. The second was Sylvan's massive face looking down at him with an expression he could not read. The twins. His voice came out as a rasp. Alive. Sylvan's voice was soft. Both alive. Both stable. Our medical teams took over when you collapsed. They followed your protocols exactly. Oliver closed his eyes. The relief was physical, a weight lifting from his chest that let him breathe properly for the first time in what felt like forever. You stopped your heart, Sylvan continued. Our doctors said you were dead for 47 seconds. They had to restart it manually. Worth it, Oliver whispered. Why? The question burst from Sylvan like something that had been building for months. Why do you care so much? They are not your species, not your children. You owe us nothing, yet you nearly died. Why? Oliver opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked. He saw confusion there, yes, but also something else. Something raw and uncertain, like a wound that had been closed for so long the muscles had forgotten how to feel. Because they deserve to live, he said simply. Because somewhere, Tessian loves them the way every parent loves their child. Because I have the skill to help, and they have the need. He paused, then added more quietly. Because I know what it is to lose a child. And I know that if someone could have saved mine, I would have wanted them to care as much as I did. Sylvan was silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time since Oliver had arrived on Ashenfell, he saw her cry. Tears rolled down her scaled face, and she made no move to hide them. We thought asking for help was weakness, she said, her voice breaking. We thought your compassion was naivety. We thought caring deeply was a failing. She lowered her massive head until it was level with Oliver's bed. We were wrong. About all of it. We were so wrong. Oliver reached out with one hand, still weak, and touched her snout gently. Then teach them, he said. Teach your people what you have learned. Because your children need more than my medicine. They need what I cannot give them. What is that? Parents who know it is okay to break for them, Oliver said. Parents who know that loving them enough to show fear and pain and desperate hope is not weakness. It is the strongest thing any of us can do. Sylvan closed her eyes, and more tears fell. In the hatching sanctuary, Shara curved her body around two small dragons. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to weep openly over the children she had almost lost. The fortress of pride that the Scarith had built around their breaking hearts finally cracked. Recovery was slow and humbling. Oliver had never been good at sitting still, and being confined to a medical bed while his patients needed him felt like torture. But both human and dragon doctors had formed an unlikely alliance to keep him resting, and not even Oliver could argue against that combined authority. The Scarith community had changed around him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Dragons who had maintained careful distance now stopped by his recovery room. They brought gifts, small things carved from volcanic stone or woven from metallic fibers. They told stories about their hatchlings, their voices losing the clinical detachment they had carried for so long. Shara visited daily with Kai, who was now strong enough to walk on his own. The young dragon would curl up at the foot of Oliver's bed and tell rambling stories about his day, while his mother watched with eyes that finally allowed hope to show. Wraith came with progress reports, updating Oliver on the 12 stabilized hatchlings and seeking advice on treatment adjustments. But more than that, he asked questions about Oliver's approach, his philosophy. How did he decide when to push and when to wait? How did he handle the losses? One at a time, Oliver had answered honestly. I handle them one at a time, and sometimes I don't handle them at all. Sometimes I just carry them. On the 8th day of his recovery, Sylvan came alone. It was late evening, the thermal pools casting dancing light across the walls. She settled near his bed, her massive form somehow managing to look uncertain. They sat in silence for a while. Oliver had learned that silence was acceptable to the Scarith, even valued. They did not fill space with empty words the way humans often did. Finally, Sylvan spoke. I need to understand something. I need you to help me understand why. Why what? Why you care so much? She turned her ancient eyes to him. You nearly died for two hatchlings who are not yours, not your species, not your responsibility. You grieve our losses as if they were personal. You speak to our children like they matter beyond their genetics. She paused. I have watched you for 6 months, and I cannot find the transaction. What do you gain from this level of investment? Oliver was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. Hands that had tried to save so many. Hands that had failed when it mattered most. I had a daughter, he said finally. Her name was Lily. Sylvan went very still. She was diagnosed with a genetic disorder when she was 4. Degenerative, progressive, no known cure. Oliver's voice was steady, but his hands clenched the blanket. I spent 3 years trying to save her. Every waking moment. I ran simulations, tested treatments, pushed every boundary I knew. I was so close to the answer. He looked up at Sylvan. She died on a Tuesday morning. 7 years old. She died in my arms while I told her about the treatment I was developing, the one that was going to fix everything. His voice cracked. 3 months later, I solved it. 3 months too late. Sylvan's eyes closed. So when I look at Kai, at Sarah and Frost, at all of them, I see Lily. I see what she could have been if someone had figured it out faster. If someone had cared enough to break themselves trying. Oliver wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. I cannot bring her back. I cannot fix the 3 months I needed. But maybe I can spare other parents that pain. Maybe I can be fast enough for someone else's child. You carry her with you, Sylvan said softly. In everything you do. Yes. Oliver smiled, sad and true. She made me better. Even in dying, she made me better. She taught me that every moment matters, that every life is worth breaking for. Sylvan was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was thick with emotion. I had 3 children, Dracos, Morel, and Saren. Oliver looked up, surprised. In 6 months, he had never heard Sylvan speak of personal loss. Dracos was first. 200 years ago. The defect took him over 5 years. I watched my son fade slowly, his scales losing their light, his wings growing too weak to fly. Sylvan's claws scraped against stone. Morel went faster. She was born sick and lived only 2 months. And Saren, my youngest, my last hope, survived to adolescence before the cascade caught up with her. I'm sorry, Oliver said quietly. She died in my arms. Sylvan continued as if he had not spoken. Saren, she died asking me why I cannot fix her. Why, with all our knowledge and all our pride, we could not save our own children. A tear rolled down her scaled face. I had no answer. I have spent 100 years without an answer. She looked at Oliver directly. We delayed asking for help for 50 years. 50 years we spent believing we should solve this ourselves, that asking others would prove us weak. Do you know how many eggs we lost in that time? How many hatchlings? Sylvan, thousands. The word was a confession and a condemnation. Thousands of children who might have lived if we had been willing to set aside our pride sooner. If we had been willing to admit we needed help. Oliver reached out, his hand tiny against her massive head, but she leaned into it like someone accepting comfort for the first time in a century. Your people learned the hard way, Sylvan said. You learn that there is no shame in needing each other. That asking for help is not weakness, but wisdom. She opened her eyes. Teach us, not just your methods, but your approach. Teach us how to care the way you do. We have forgotten, or perhaps we never knew. You know how, Oliver said gently. You're doing it right now. What you are feeling, this breaking open for your children, this is what they need. Not perfection, not pride, just parents who love them enough to be vulnerable. Sylvan pulled back slightly, looking at him with something like wonder. You really believe that? I know it. Oliver smiled. Lily taught me. In the end, she did not care about my research or my reputation or anything except that I was there, that I loved her, that I broke for her. His voice softened. Your children do not need you to be strong all the time. They need you to be real. Real, Sylvan repeated, testing the word. Real, afraid, hopeful, desperately in love with them despite the fear of losing them. Oliver looked toward the hatching sanctuary. That is what makes the caring matter. That is what makes it worth it. Sylvan stood, and for the first time since Oliver had met her, she seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight she had carried for 100 years had finally been set down. "Will you stay?" she asked. "After the immediate crisis is managed? Will you teach our medical teams, our parents, our whole society how to approach this differently?" Oliver thought of the twins, of Kai, of the 12 lives stabilized and the 3 he had lost. He thought of Lily and the legacy she had left him, the understanding that grief could become purpose and pain could transform into compassion. "Yes," he said, "I'll stay as long as you need me." Sylvan nodded slowly. Then she did something Oliver had never seen a Scarith do. She bowed her head to him, a gesture of respect and gratitude and something deeper. "Thank you," she said, "for showing us what we had forgotten, for breaking us open when we needed it most." As she left, Oliver settled back into his bed and looked at the small picture of Lily he had placed beside it. Her smile looked back at him, frozen and perfect. "I think you would have liked them," he whispered to the image. "The dragons. They are learning to be brave in a whole new way." Outside, in the hatching sanctuary, parents began to gather around their children differently. They spoke more softly. They allowed their fear to show. They held their hatchlings close and whispered words of love instead of clinical observations. The Scarith were learning to break. And in that breaking, they were becoming whole. 5 years later, the hatching sanctuary looked different in ways that went beyond the physical changes. Oliver stood at the entrance watching the morning light stream through new openings carved in the volcanic rock. The space had been expanded 3 times to accommodate the population that everyone had thought impossible. 2,000 hatchlings. The number still made his breath catch. Not all had survived. The defect was manageable now, but not cured, and some genetic variations proved too severe even for their best efforts. Oliver had stood at 43 memorial fires over the years, each one carving a small piece from his heart, but 2,000 had lived. 2,000 futures that had been written off as impossible. "Dr. Hayes, you're going to be late for your own ceremony." Oliver turned to find Wraith approaching, his blue scales now marked with the silver bands of a master geneticist. The young dragon had become his partner in every sense, matching Oliver's compassion with Scarith precision, creating a synthesis of approaches that worked better than either alone. "I was just thinking," Oliver said. "You're always thinking. It is both your greatest strength and most frustrating quality." Wraith's tone was warm with affection. "Gulme, the others are waiting, and Sylvan will have my hide if we delay." The ceremony was being held in the new research center, a building that straddled the line between human and Scarith architecture. Its official name was the Interspecies Genetic Research Facility, but everyone called it the Lily Hayes Memorial Center, and Oliver had long since stopped trying to correct them. The main hall was packed. Dragons and humans mingled in ways that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. Scientists from a dozen species had come for the opening, drawn by the reputation this small facility had built for solving impossible cases. Sylvan stood at the center platform, and Oliver was struck again by how much she had changed. The weight she had carried was still there, but it no longer crushed her. She wore it differently now, transformed from burden into purpose. "We gather today," Sylvan began, her voice carrying across the hall, "to open a facility dedicated to ensuring that what nearly destroyed us never destroys another species. But before we discuss the future, we must acknowledge the past." She gestured to the wall behind her, where names were carved in stone. Thousands of them. Every Scarith hatchling lost to the defect over 300 years. "This is the cost of pride," Sylvan said quietly. "Each name represents a child who died while we insisted we needed no one. Each represents a parent's grief that might have been prevented if we had learned sooner what a human had to teach us." The hall was silent. We believed strength meant standing alone. We believed asking for help diminished us. We believed showing emotion made us weak. Sylvan's eyes found Oliver in the crowd. A human showed us that true strength is not standing alone. It is having the courage to reach out, to care, to let yourself break for others. She gestured to the opposite wall, where another set of names was carved. The 2,000 who had survived. This is the future we nearly lost. Each name represents a choice to set aside pride in favor of compassion. Each represents a lesson learned in the hardest way possible. Her voice strengthened. And each represents our promise that we will never again let pride cost us what matters most. The ceremony continued with speeches from various dignitaries and researchers. Oliver only half listened, his attention drawn to the windows overlooking the hatching sanctuary. He could see Kai there, no longer the trembling hatchling, but a strong adolescent dragon training to become a doctor. The young dragon was working with a group of even younger hatchlings, his patience and gentleness a mirror of what he had received. Sarah and Frost were there too, the twins who had nearly cost Oliver his life. They were helping organize the new intake protocols, their efficiency and care making them invaluable to the medical teams. After the ceremony, after the formal parts were done and people began to mingle, Kai approached Oliver with careful steps. "Dr. Hayes," the young dragon said formally. Then, more quietly, "Oliver." Oliver smiled. "Okay, how are the new protocols working?" "Well, very well." Kai hesitated, then continued. "I wanted to thank you for everything. You saved my life. You and about 2,000 others," Oliver said lightly. "No." Kai's voice was serious. "I mean, you saved my life. Not just from the defect. You showed me what it means to care about something bigger than yourself. You taught me that healing is not just about fixing bodies, but about seeing souls." The young dragon's eyes, still that bright gold, met Oliver's. "You gave me a purpose, a reason to fight. You made me want to be better." Oliver felt his throat tighten. "You did that yourself, Kai. I just gave you the time to figure it out. Time I would not have had without you." Kai leaned down, bringing his head level with Oliver's. "You are my family, not by blood or species, but by choice. And I wanted you to know that." Before Oliver could respond, Shara approached with another dragon, a young male Oliver did not recognize. "Oliver Hayes," Shara said formally. "In accordance with Scarith tradition, and with the blessing of the council, I formally ask if you will accept adoption into my family line." Oliver stared at her. "What? You saved my son. You have dedicated years to saving all our children. You have lived among us, bled for us, grieved with us." Shara's voice softened. "You are already family in every way that matters. We simply wish to make it official." Oliver looked from Shara to Kai to the young male dragon, who Shara introduced as her nephew. "A family, not as by blood, but as by choice and time and shared struggle." "I would be honored," he said quietly. The Scarith ceremony that followed was simple but profound. Oliver stood among dragons who had become his family, feeling more at home than he had since Lily died. As Shara placed the family crest around his neck, a small pendant carved from volcanic stone, Oliver felt something in his chest finally settle. That evening, Oliver stood on the eastern tower where Sylvan had stood 5 years before, watching stars. The dark spots were lighting up again, colonies being reborn as populations grew, futures being reclaimed. Sylvan joined him, moving quietly for something so large. "Regrets?" she asked. "About staying?" "Never." Oliver smiled. "I came here thinking I would save you, but I think you saved me too." "How so?" "I was drowning in grief, using work to avoid healing, running from Lily's memory instead of honoring it." He touched the pendant at his neck. "You all taught me that grief does not have to be the end, that it can become something beautiful if we let it. That love does not die just because the person does." Sylvan was quiet for a moment. "You came here to save our future. Instead, you taught us how to deserve one." Oliver thought about that, about the 2,000 hatchlings learning to live in a world that valued compassion as much as strength, about the parents learning to love openly, to grieve honestly, to hope despite fear, about the research center that would help dozens of other species facing similar crises. "No," he said finally. "We taught each other. That is what makes it matter." They stood together watching the stars light up, human and dragon, teacher and student, family by choice. Below them, the hatching sanctuary hummed with life. Young dragons played under the watchful eyes of parents who no longer hid their love behind walls of pride. That I in the research center, Wraith worked late developing a treatment protocol for another species facing genetic collapse. He worked with Oliver's methods, combining them with Scarith precision, creating something new and better. And in the memorial hall, a young dragon stood before the wall of names. She had come to pay respect to an aunt she had never met, lost 50 years before help arrived. She placed her claw on the carved stone and made a quiet promise. "We remember," she whispered. "We remember the cost, and we promise to never pay it again." Oliver felt a small vibration through the tower. He looked up to see a ship entering orbit, bearing scientists from a species he did not recognize. More people seeking help, more lives to save. "Ready?" Sylvan asked. Oliver thought of Lily, of the legacy she had left him, of all the children he had saved and all the ones still waiting. He thought of his chosen family, of the future they were building together, of the truth he had learned through breaking and healing that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their adaptability. It was their refusal to let others suffer alone, their insistence that every life mattered, that every child deserved someone willing to break for them, that compassion was not weakness but the strongest thing any being could offer. And now, the Scarith knew it too. "Ready," Oliver said. Together, they descended to meet the newcomers, to offer help to another species in need, to continue the work that had transformed them all. Above them, another star flickered to life in the constellation of Scarith colonies. A world reborn, a future reclaimed. And in the hatching sanctuary, 2,000 young dragons slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that they were loved. Not despite the fear of losing them, but because of how precious they were. The future the Scarith had nearly lost was breathing, growing, thriving. And it all began because one human refused to let them face their darkest hour alone.